Hello and welcome to Live Work Life 60-Minute Mentor. Are you planning to continue to perform your superstitious dance, or in the new world of work, marginal gains? This week we're joined by Paul Sharp. Hello, Paul. Hope you're well.
Hello, good to meet everybody.
Good. Everyone else, I hope you can all hear me. If you can hear me, please put some comments in the chat room as normal. There's lots of people sort of logging into the webinar today, so if you can put some notes down so we can actually hear, well, we know you can hear us, that'd be great from there. This week we've sort of, Paul and I decided to step it up, and as I sort of emailed out to you that we thought it would be a good idea to bring someone else in, and Paul and I said we sort of cajoled Paul Sharp into joining us, but I think we've actually done his press ganged him into joining us today, and we'll be working from there. But to give you a bit of a background on Paul, Paul's got 18 years experience in the recruitment sector, pretty much covered all large-scale national agencies with SME technical agencies, building their leading RPO and MSP teams. So done lots and lots of things. He's headed up talent acquisition teams, providing services to BAE. And prior to that, he worked in the retail sector and a passion for people and customer organisation. But to give you an idea of what we've brought Paul in for, he's led multiple sort of national sales teams where he's always been adapted a sort of consultative approach with clients to solve their problems, which has given Paul really friends for life and a very strong network, but also it's helped him build multiple and varied talent services for the likes of clients like RBS, Fujitsu, Siemens, EE, Shop Direct and Debenhams. And he's sold contingency labour solutions worth £27 million to clients such as Vertex, who are part of the, I think, the United Utilities, and £32 million to Insight Investment, part of BNYM, and £12 million to Collisons. So what we've got here is someone who's used to selling the big ticket deal, and what we're going to look at is how we can then push that down into the small SME market, because I think Paul and I were discussing there's lots of similarities that we can use that can help us to build better relationships with our clients. He's also built with people like Dixon's and Rico and MPS, for people like Royal Brompton, where he sort of grew 25 contractors, etc. So a very, very mixed bag from there. But it's the big ticket issue that we're interested in and how we're working from there. Underpinning it all his skills is his experience in the sales process and how to leverage marketing, research and innovation, and how to stand out from the crowd, especially when you're working in a marketplace where you have massive amounts of competition in that big ticket marketplace, very similar to the SME marketplace, but how to stand out from the crowd in order to be successful. So Paul, I hope that's done you justice and give you an idea of what we're doing and what we're talking about. Paul Jacobs, you christened this webinar, The Superstitious Dance. Give me just a very quick understanding what you mean by the Superstitious Dance.
Yeah, well, morning everybody. I hope the weather is as beautiful as it is here in the Mecca of the universe, Essex, and I hope you're enjoying and trying to get out into it occasionally in between Zoom calls. So yeah, I mean, there's two Pauls on this call today. Obviously, I'm the best looking one. That's quite obvious for anyone that's staring at us. And he's a Burnley supporter, which obviously wasn't something that we brought into the conversation, but you can send your comments in a brown envelope that we won't read them out. Anyway, let's get into this. Superstitious dance is an expression that we used to use way back in the day when we were doing coaching back in the Alfred Marks days. As they were taking the mickey out of me earlier about my Alfred Marks days, but the superstitious dance can be explained this way. Basically, it's sort of the ancient Incas and the sort of rain dance that they would have performed on the same day every year for centuries, on the premise that if they danced on that day, they would get rain for their crops. And say once every 5 years, it would rain, but the other 4 years it didn't. But if they didn't continue to do the superstitious dance every year, then they ran the risk that it wouldn't rain. So they do the rain dance every year, and most years it doesn't work. And when you then sort of look at that from a business perspective, and you talk about the superstitious dance, well, I guess to an extent, we're all guilty of it. We all do the same things every year on the premise that it's worked before. We haven't really figured out how often it worked, but it's worked before. So we'll continue doing it on the premise that if we stop doing it, it won't work any longer. It doesn't make any sense. And we are coming into, as we keep talking about, the new modern world of work. It's a horrible cliche, but it's been an opportunity, I think, over the last 14 weeks, is it? 14, maybe 15 weeks, to recalibrate, to rethink our models, our business models, and consider whether what we were doing in total is what we need to be doing in total going forward. And I think unquestionably, the answer to that question is it's not the same. We need to change. I'll add, I don't think that means we're chucking out everything we've ever done wholesale. That makes no sense either. Lots of things we did pre-COVID were working beautifully, working extremely well for us, helped to develop our businesses in many instances to be great businesses. But there are elements of what we were doing pre this crisis that we really do need to analyze very deeply and take a strong, courageous decision around chucking it out, stopping it, stop doing certain things so we can create space and time to do things we need to do, new things we need to do to make a strong impression and develop our businesses in this so-called new world of work.
So as we move forward into that, when Paul and I started to pull this together, what we started to look at was what that superstitious dance actually means and how that works. And what we sort of led to was the usual comment that it's not about making wholesale changes across your business sometimes. It's about making marginal changes with your business to really sort of move your business forward. And we talk about marginal changes, marginal gains and marginal changes and stuff like that. And if you look at what the British cycling team did and the British rowing team did during the last 5 or 6 Olympics, all about how to make the bike go faster and how to make the boat go faster, their constant reviews and their constant development of their systems, and that they were proud but never satisfied, made them the most profitable Olympic gold medal winning teams in the UK Olympic history. So it's never about being stationary to them. It was all about how they could make the products go faster. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's open up and sort of look at how we can sort of do those things, Paul. So how we make the things go faster. So the first thing we always start to think about is that as goes the head of the business, goes the business. So how we manage the business and what we do from a management of the business is really important. So we start to look at the management of the business, the moving of the pawns on the chessboard, as we so to speak. Let's talk about what we can start to look at. So the first thing we always look at in management is the terms and conditions that we work to from a business to business point of view and from an employee point of view. So give me your views, Paul, on terms of business and how you'd look to grow and increase your terms of business in this type of marketplace, which is a bear marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Howard. I think this issue of terms and conditions of business is a very good place to start. I mean, as dull as it sounds, it's something that can make a huge difference to our income. Years ago, back in my Office Angels days, when I was the MD there, we put in a small clause into the terms of business that made a significant difference every year regarding temp margin. And the clause was pretty straightforward. It simply said something along the lines of that we, the company, reserved the right each year annually to increase our charge per hour by an amount, a percentage amount equivalent to the average increase of the retail price index during the last 12 months. In other words, the famous old shopping trolley increase in standard of living percentage. And so we had that option every year to look at our charge per hour increase by whatever it would have been, 1.5%, 2%. And we used to do that. I mean, obviously not with the agreements that were set in stone, the agreements that set outside of the terms and conditions of business, but in our transactional areas. And yes, of course, we had some clients kick back, and that would be a conversation. I don't recall losing any business during this period when we did these things. And we always pointed out to our customers that as in their businesses, our business costs had also increased. You know, the cost of salaries had increased. The cost of rent, very often in many instances in our offices, we had 120, had increased. rates had increased, utilities had increased, advertising costs, and so on and so on. And so therefore our charge increase, because it was capped around the retail price index, was all about just maintaining the same level of profitability that we'd had the year before, the same in any business. So yes, we negotiated in some instances with clients. Very occasionally we'd back down, but in most instances clients accepted the situation. And, you know, across every hour that we build in the next 12 months, it made a significant difference to our profit line. Naturally, when you look at permanent percentages, introduction fees, a small tweak here and there, not only in terms of, you know, an extra 0.5% or a 0.1 or a 1%, but also in checking out the bandings, the salary bandings that you're charging your percentages on can make a difference. Not least the fact that obviously when salaries increase every year for our candidates, our percentages are set against those fees, and therefore the fee levels rise anyway. There are a number of things you can look at when you look at your terms and conditions of business. And we've talked a lot about retained business, haven't we, Howard? And exclusivity, and looking for a level of retained money up front to help with the search and selection process. And here is this opportunity to take a good, strong look at your TOBs and decide on whether they are now fit for purpose in this new world of work. And I think you'll find that a little bit of thought and just a bit of identification of where you can tweak here and there without doing anything in any way that would potentially cause a problem to your integrity, but just basic keeping your heads above methodology will make a difference. And now's the time to have a good, strong look at that.
I think the thing that I always looked at, especially when you start to look at a business, and it's how you invest that same pound today, tomorrow, and make more money out of that same pound. And part of your terms and conditions really sort of drive that in. And what you're talking about there, Paul, is driving from the fee earning end. I also look at it from the other side. If your terms and conditions, let's say, are 30-day payment terms or 14-day payment terms, whatever payment terms you have with your client, if you can reduce those payment terms, especially if you're running high numbers of temp and you are factoring your temp lines, etc., then obviously the quicker you can get your money into your company, the less interest you are paying on your business. So it is about looking at what you're doing from both sides of the business and making sure your terms and conditions are conducive to actually make business. Now, what a lot of companies do is they get a set of terms. Now, that's terms that they've got from the REC, ABSCO, they've gone to a lawyer, or whether it's terms and conditions they have procured from somewhere along the line. They very seldom change those terms and conditions for fear of the cost of actually looking at it. Well, we always look at it the other way. The fear of not changing them will start to cost you money. So the first thing I'd say from a management point of view to you start to look at to make marginal gains is look at your terms of business and look at where you can make those marginal gains, because that's the first part of that marginal gain. The superstitious dance, as Paul likes to call it, is the fact that we never look at our terms and conditions and we keep them year in, year out, and we very seldom change them unless there has to be a legal change with regards to employment, etc., of what we're doing. And that's the other side of the terms and conditions that we have. We don't just have the terms and conditions for our business, we also have employment terms. And as we know at the moment, there is an opportunity of, well, not an opportunity, should I say, there is the unfortunate opportunity coming around the corner where people may be made redundant. Now we've got to start to think about what do our terms and conditions look like, but also there's the opportunity for people to be working from home. Now that is going to become more of the norm. Now, working from home has just been covered by the government in a short period of time, but it's not covered in your terms and conditions. So really what we start to look at is our terms and conditions about working from home. What does that actually look like within our terms and conditions? Because I could almost guarantee everyone's terms and conditions will say a fixed place of work, albeit for a certain period of time, etc. Now we have to make sure that we cover working from home, because the last thing that you want is also a employee coming back to you with a tribunal case for working from home but being put at risk, health and safety, etc. So your employment terms also need to change. The big thing inside your employment terms also that you need to look at is your restrictive clauses and how your restrictive clauses manifest themselves right across your business. Because again, if you are unfortunate and you have to make people redundant, you also need to think about what restrictions you're putting on your employees as they exit your business. So it's important that we also look at that. The other thing that we sort of seem to tend to keep with our terms and conditions, whether they be our employee terms or our business terms, is when things like IR35, AWR, and GDPR come in, we change them generically. Now you start to think about GDPR with people working from home and saving data at home, it becomes a whole different ballgame. So again, you need to make sure that your terms of employment are covered, and if they're not in your terms of employment, they're certainly covered in your employees' handbooks to work from there. The next thing that we sort of looked at, Paul, when we started to talk about this was, and this is where we can start to bring Paul Sharp in as well, is about budgets and targets. Paul, this has always been a very big question over the last 4 or 5 weeks. This has been coming up about what do we do with budgets and how do we retarget our people coming back into work. Now, obviously, this has been a very different set of circumstances, say, to the 2008 recession, because this is a humanitarian recession and it's covered everybody. Talk to me about how you would look to re-budget people and retarget their staff.
Well, I mean, I've said this before, you know, the budgets that were set at the beginning of any company's financial year, you just need to chuck them away. You tear them up, throw them in the bin, because they're no use any longer. And nobody could have possibly predicted this. And I think you've got to start all over again. And my view is you know, I've always said this whenever I talk with my clients, I talk about 3 levels of budgeting. I talk about best case scenario. So, you know, your absolute dream situation where you think you could get, that's perhaps beyond, maybe beyond you, but in an absolute nirvana situation, what do you think you could do? Perms, temps, contract. Then you do your middle position, which is essentially where you think you'll be. And then you do your worst case scenario, which is like, which should hopefully just keep your head above your cost line. So my best advice always is do 3 budgets, 3 target sets. And the one that you're hoping to get, as I say, is the top end, but you'll settle for the middle position, which is the realistic position. Now, I think you'd want to do that immediately. And then I think, you know, I've said this before, not just you guys as the owners of your businesses, but get your senior teams and indeed even the consultants to start predicting what they believe they can do. And I don't think you can look much further than 2-3 months. And then look again in a few weeks' time, tear them up, start again. 2 weeks' time, tear them up, start again. Because I think we're moving at such a pace now, as we're beginning to get it back into the work environment. It is very, very difficult to make accurate predictions. None of us have been there before. We've all got strong opinions about what we think is around the corner. There's no question that budgets and your targets will be to a large extent dictated in terms of your optimism on sectorial issues. There's no question that certain sectors are faring a lot better than others presently. I can give you very good examples of sectors that have done pretty well and are still doing very well. And I can give you other examples of sectors that are still doing virtually nothing at the moment. So I think, again, it depends on which sectors you're in. You'll know very well how they're beginning to perform. The good news, I think, is that things are improving. No question. My clients, in many instances, slowly are seeing improvements. But I would advise you to get your teams and your senior managers to do their projections and predictions. You do yours separately. Look at them together, reach common agreement, tear them up, start again. And keep doing that, because that's how you're going to end up with coming up with things that are reasonable. If you set your guys the same KPIs, same targets you were giving them pre-March, you're going to demoralize them pretty fast. It's simply not going to work. Equally, you've got to be careful you don't set them too low, because obviously that's not going to help you either. I don't know what you think, Paul. This is little Paul, not big Paul.
Thanks, Dad. I think you're absolutely right. I think the worst case scenario has got to include everything. So it's got to include staying cash positive, but possibly deferring on VAT payments, HMRC payments. So I know that ultimately you're just kicking the can down the road by deferring those payments, but that for me is worst case scenario, and included in that any sort of furlough payments and everything else. So that's what we've been doing. Ultimately, at Interquest is looking at the worst case scenario, but really trying to focus in on that middle road and going for that middle road. And the middle road was just about staying cash positive and paying the relevant payments and everything else, so we're not deferring anything. So that was utopia at this moment in time. I think the bit about staff coming back from furlough is quite an interesting one. Our position hadn't really changed, and it was all about each individual on average hitting the 10k in margin or net fee income per month per head. Obviously you'd have your super billers doing a lot more than that, and you'd have some junior people doing slightly less, but that's what we always measured the business on by practice. So if I had a team of 7 people up in Harrogate, but then a team of 15 down in Berkhamsted, and bits of teams in between. So everybody had the same metrics, which was the 10k per head. If you then work that through in terms of from a cash in, cash out perspective, then that made a relatively nice amount of EBIT, providing each business hit that. And if you talk to most people in the industry, I think most people aim for that 120 per year on average. Anything above 120 is upper quartile performance for me.
I think you've got to look at that in the way it's worked both pools. Is that I always think when you start looking at budgets and targets, and you look at the budget and you look at the target, if you're looking at a third, so for every pound that comes in, a third goes back to your staff, a third goes back to your running your business, and a third goes back to your profit line. And you've got to remember the middle third of running your business are predominantly fixed costs, because the cost of your consultant is in that first third, because it's the salary plus commission plus NI, etc. So if you're actually overpaying your staff and overpaying what they're worth, then what you find out is actually eating to your profit. And that's when you start to look at what's going on and how you work from there. So I would say, if you look at that top down, bottom down budgeting, as both pools have been talking about there, and getting your consultants to come back and then rip it up and then you come back, etc. What I tend to find is consultants tend to over-promise and then under-deliver, because they feel the pressure that they must add money to their budget and to look good. And there's a manager coming in and reducing that, it gives them a nice sense of well-being. If you then say, right, I'm now going to rip that budget up, let's start again, then again, they'll come in a little bit more conservative, but again, it'll be higher than your expectations. So again, it's a really good way to re-motivate your staff. So what the question's about is, how do I re-motivate my staff, bringing them back from furlough? If they start to see a sensible approach to KPIs and a sensible approach to their budgeting and their targets, then all of a sudden they get a bit of different feeling. And it's that feeling that they feel cared for, where a lot of them are probably thinking they're going to come back and have the big stick. We need to make money quickly, and they're going to hit you with a big stick, etc. That is not what it's about. So you've got to start to think about your budgets and targets, and about how it can remotivate and relaunch your business. And as we said before on these things, if these are new people coming into your business, you would normally give them 3 months grace, a ramp up over a 3-month period on a target. So again, let's start to look at things and be sensible about what we give people, and then drive that into the business. But as Paul said, it's not the fact that we set our targets too low and hit them, it's the fact that we don't set them high enough and reach for them. So we've got to set them high enough so that people can reach for them, but not too high so they feel that they are just unachievable from there. Which goes to that next comment, Paul, that we talk about on management. And this is a real big thing that I think, as people start to come back to a different type of work and a different thing, is about the why and understanding the why. If we talk about what we talked about a lot last week in the marketing session, about adding value to your clients and your customers and to your staff, it all starts with that mission and value that you set your business. So that's all about your why. And this is something that we've talked about an awful lot. We talk about bringing people back into your business. And I'm having conversations with clients who are quite literally removing some of their big billers from their business. Why? Not because they're not great at billing, it's because they are a bit of a pain and prevent other people from billing. And so when we start to talk about our why, and we look at our mission and values, I always think about who loves your business, who would do anything and actually stands by the values and the mission that your business is all about. And then who likes your business? Are they there because they are moving towards that love, or are they going the other way, simply there just to take money out of your business?
And sometimes some of the big billers just simply want to take money out of your business and don't care about the business and you're just moaning. They just see you as a vehicle and opportunity. So you've got to start to think about your why and how that is reflected across your employees and what that why actually means to them, because that creates the mission and the value. And once we have that right, that becomes a saleable asset. And that saleable asset is into your clients and how your clients feel when that person is actually dealing with them. And as we move out of lockdown, it's the client's feelings that is what we're appealing to more than anything else, rather than what we're actually selling to them. So Paul, talk to me about, well, both Paul, give me your view on whys.
Well, look, I mean, let's just, this whole thing about, your why, WHY, is really about and most of you guys will have seen him, Simon Sinek. So if you haven't watched the Simon Sinek, Sinek, video on TED Talk, tune in, look at it. It's very interesting. He's a marketing guy. It turns out he's British. I didn't know that, but he is. And he talks really about why people will queue for 2 days on a pavement when Apple bring out the latest iPhone or iPad or whatever. But they don't do that, and no disrespect to Dell, when Dell bring out their latest laptop. It's not necessarily the case that Dell's computer is less powerful or less attractive. It's simply the case that people buy into why Apple do what they do. People want to queue up for 2 days and sleep on the pavement because they want to be the first kid on the block with the new Apple product. They don't feel that level of affinity towards other rivals, even though those rivals may be producing equipment that's at least as good as the Apple equipment. That's true, I think, when you look at certain products. We buy into why they do it because we want to feel associated with their methodology, with their attitudes. We want to be cool like the other kids on the block by owning a piece of Apple kit, even though it's twice as expensive. Apple got it right. We know that. I mean, they're clearly by a mile the most successful business in the world. They're quite a remarkable organization. Not many of us can develop an Apple-style business, but we can take some lessons from the way they market themselves and the way they present themselves. And I think that it's a very interesting video to watch, as I said, on TED Talks. Have a look at why you do stuff. Why is it you do it? I mean, when I go and talk to recruitment businesses for the very first time, when I meet them, we spend a day together, which unfortunately isn't possible at the moment, but when I talk to them via Zoom, one of the first things I ask them is why people buy their services. Why would I buy your services rather than the 10 other recruitment businesses in your territory? Why would I do that? And I often get the same kind of answers from people. I'm not being disrespectful. They'll say, well, they buy me, they buy my people, they like my guys, they like what we do, we go and meet our clients. I tend to get the same answers from every recruitment business. And it isn't that that isn't true. It isn't that they're telling me something that isn't accurate. Of course, people buy people. We know that in our industry sector. But they very rarely give me anything that's even remotely unique. And it's not surprising, therefore, that when you look at most recruitment companies, by and large, variation on the theme, not much different. But here's our opportunity as we're coming into this new world of work to really think hard about how we create differentials in our businesses. And last week, Lauren was talking about marketing and how to create a standout brand. It was very interesting. And actually, despite what we all think often about the cost of marketing, the reality is you can create a standout brand in this digital world at a very, very low budget. And what you do need, I have to say, is a level of courage to create distinction between what you stand for and the way you look and feel versus your competitors. You know, going safe when it comes to marketing generally doesn't result in standout positioning. And I think that what you have is an opportunity to sit with your people, to talk about your why. Why do we do it? Why should anybody use us or even care about us? And start to understand from their perspective why companies or candidates should want to use your business. But very importantly, you should be talking to your clients. And in the end, the decisions you reach about creating differentials in your business will be relative to what your customers want from you. Not what you think they want, but what they tell you they want. And how are you going to find that out? You need to speak to them, and you need to speak to them regularly. Whether it's Unfortunately, we can't do it much at the moment. Visiting them, which of course there is no substitute for, but certainly Zoom calls, Skype calls, anything that starts to get you closer and closer and closer to build that trusted advisor positioning. And when you ask them what they want, they will tell you. And if they can't tell you because you're close enough to them, you'll find out what the gaps are. In the end, nobody in our industry after 130 years, 140 years of this industry are likely to come up with anything that's utterly unique. Forget unique, but come back to Howard's point. If you can be 1% better in every area of your business versus your competitors, actually, that's all you need to be in order to be better and more successful. I don't know if is that a view you share, Paul?
Yeah, I think so. Perhaps a slightly different approach. For me, it probably starts with the what before the why. And this is just my own personal style in terms of how I sort of try and approach things. And what do I mean by the what? It's really what's happening in the market. What are the lighthouses that we have to navigate ourselves around rather than ignoring? And I think for me, if you take a step back, the what is, what's happening in the world of work, what's happening between permanent labour and non-permanent labour, what's happening with in-house recruitment teams. And these are all driven by macro dynamics, which nobody can affect, but these are things you have to navigate yourself around. So if you look at the labour market as it stands today, slightly dependent upon which sector, which services you offer, I think the vast majority of views out there in the market is that contingent is going to bounce back quicker and slightly stronger than perm. So therefore, from a business owner perspective, what does that mean in terms of, you're managing the cash flow or having the right skills in the business to be able to provide contingent labour going forward? Contingent is non-permanent, so it can be temp or contractors, by the way, from my perspective. I think most organisations are still reticent, internal teams are still reticent to incorporate non-perm labour in terms of their total talent model. So it still can be fairly transactional. But I think everybody, and particularly people like Deloitte and PwC, they're all predicting that non-perm labour is going to become a more prevalent feature of the workforce going forward. So, according to the staffing industry analysts, it was a few years ago, 80-20, so 80% perm, 20% non-perm. Now it's probably much nearer to 70-30. I think we're going to get towards 60-40 pretty quick. So I think as organisations struggle to put headcount on the balance sheet, I think they'll bring more labour in for a more strategic perspective, but I think some of those labour assignments will become quite short term. So I don't think they'll become 12 months, 24 months, which is what they have been in the past. So therefore, if the market's changing, then I guess it comes back to, as a business owner or director or manager, what are the services that you have either here today, which could, help organisations, given that we're moving to much more sort of contingent labour model? Or what other services have you got? What knowledge have you got in the business that you could package up and sell back to a client? I think sometimes in recruitment, we really forget just how much knowledge and experience we've got and how much clients would really buy that. So I remember when I went in-house for the first time, and I think from my perspective, and when you speak to heads of resourcing, I think this is a fairly common trait, you become very dependent upon agencies for providing you with information and knowledge and intel. And so therefore, there's a great opportunity, providing you are somebody who's got that knowledge and intel, and it's definitely worth sharing, by the way, then I think you can build up a really strong relationship built around trust. Trust for me is based around empathy, logic, and authenticity. And providing you've got that logic in the information and market data that you're sharing, then I think you're going to build really strong relationships. And I think there's no more important time than now, which is all about building proper relationships. Not many clients are buying. However, clients are prepared to listen. So, whether it be building out some marketing slide decks, whether it be talking to, candidates who have worked at an organization and asking them 3 basic questions and then presenting that data back to the client. There's loads of things you can do which don't have a lot of cost associated with it. but clients are really interested in what's going on in the market, how they're perceived, what the competitors are doing. And of course, if you're speaking to other organizations which are their competitors, then you can start to share, this is what Sainsbury's are doing in terms of onboarding, or this is how they're using technology to sift all these applications that are now coming into the ether for each role that's being advertised. So I think building those relationships up is really key. I think the second bit for me is about always going one step higher. So if your relationship at this moment in time is with a business partner or a talent manager or a HRBP, then I think for me it's always about getting one level higher. Ultimately, you're trying to get or build a relationship with somebody who's got some decision-making authority. Because if you can move your relationship to that trusted advisor part, then one, you're going to create a lot more stickiness with the client. You're going to not be as transactional, and they're going to find it harder to replace you with another provider, because they're going to value what you tell them. They're going to perceive you to be much more consultative than sales. Sales is very short term. It's about the deal today. When I bought a car last year from Network Q, the sales guy was all over me until I'd signed the deal, and then I couldn't get hold of him after that. I was passed from pillar to post. So it's all about the short-term sales. Being consultative is much more about the longer-term view. And that will mean sometimes you'll have conversations or do work or provide information or intelligence or ideas, and there may not be something from it. But where you've got those relationships, from my perspective, those people have always come back to me at some point downstream, and it has resulted in a business relationship because they've trusted me that I'm going to do the right thing by them rather than doing the right thing by me as a agency worker. I think it's also about being innovative. When Howard sort of mentioned some of the really big deals that I've been involved in and led in my career, I've also done some really small ones. And I think sometimes we forget just how much, again, knowledge we've got in the business or skills you've got in your each individual practice or business, and how you can package those up and do something different. And I think I'll give you an example of that. I was targeting ASOS up until about a year ago. ASOS had around 1,000 non-perm workers. It was a free-for-all. It wasn't centrally coordinated. There was a lot of agencies in there making a lot of money, and a lot of consultancies in there making a lot of money as well. And they just needed some help. They thought they needed to do some business planning, and they went out to tender. I had a relationship with the procurement lead, and he looked upon me as somebody that he trusted because we'd done work together in the past. He invited me to tender. Now, as an agency, would you naturally think you can sell a business planning product? You probably think no. But however, when you start to break all the service lines down, you may not have done it as one individual service, but you've probably done bits of it and components. You package that all together, off you go, write a really good bid, do a really good presentation. And we were up against PwC. And when I found that out, I was scared, thinking, God, I'm up against PwC for a bit of consultancy work. And because of the agency and recruitment knowledge we had, we knocked PwC out of the park and won that piece of business. So it's a relatively small piece of business in the grand scheme of things. But because of the great work that we've done, we've kept those relationships going at ASOS. So sometimes it's just about finding those nuggets that you can help an organization solve a problem, and it'll lead to something, either a relationship or it'll lead to some other business downstream.
It's quite interesting, Paul, when you say that about solving a problem and working a problem. And when we start to talk about the why, we're talking about why that company works. And what you're talking about is the what the company actually does that evolves around that why. And I think your comment there about doing small deals is really important. And I think I class that as intellectual humility, that to help people and smart people unlock their full potential. So as a manager and as a business owner, your job really is to be helping them to become the value catalyst to get into your clients, drive your clients. And I think that's where people need to start to really look at that why of your business, because then that starts to help define the strategy of your business. And if you have that finite strategy that ends at a certain goal, and a lot of business owners say, I've got a 5-year plan, I've got this plan. And what that does, it sets their staff on that same 5-year plan. And what happens is that the staff see no value in it for them after that 5 years. So you've got to actually set an infinite business strategy where your goals and milestone are just part of that. If you then set that strategy with your clients as well, then what you're doing is you're projecting the next goal, the next goal, the next goal. And what you're doing then is creating a growth mindset within your business constantly. So what you're talking about there, Paul, is you're talking about going into clients and talking about what their next goal is, what their driver is, what do they need from a recruitment agency, not the here and now. We've been talking about that. People talk about recruitment being a distressed purchase. And I've always said it's only a very small amount of recruitment is a distressed purchase. The rest is there. So to do that, what I think business owners need to do to sort of move this on to the next question, because we've only answered the first question, we've been on it 40 minutes. So you can see how it is. So to move forward, we've got to look at that from a business owner's point of view, is what I always call about your intellectual honesty. And your intellectual honesty is about sharing your plans, about talking to your team about their concerns, looking at how you can collaborate across the team, because we talk about putting strategy in, and we always talk about putting strategy in. However, what the strategy should start to create is the culture. And once we create a really great culture, culture will always beat strategy, because the culture will drive the strategy forward. So what then world-class leaders need to be able to do is create that initial culture and then create a world-class strategy behind that culture that drives the business forward. So if you forever work on culture but don't work on your strategy, you'll have a really good business. If you only work on your strategy but work on culture, don't work on culture, then your business suffers. If you work on your culture and drive a brilliant strategy where people feel that they can collaborate into that strategy, the marginal gains, making the boat go faster, everyone's got an idea, then all of a sudden you create a really powerful business, a business to be reckoned with. And what you're talking about there, Paul, is going into a client against a PwC and coming in with a marginal gain, a marginal information that is different to PwC because they haven't got that in-depth knowledge. But to you, that's just a marginal gain that gave you a huge win. And that sometimes it's just those small pieces of information and snippets of information that most recruitment agencies have but fail to see the value of, that they never actually deliver on. So
I really agree, and I think it also comes back to what Paul Jacobs said, which is about just having conversations and regular dialogue and conversations. Because if you're having those conversations, you'll find those things to build upon. And a true story. Literally about 3 weeks ago, I've got a relationship with the HRD at SAS, based down in Marlow, and they were always brought on 15 interns up in Glasgow. And the agency that they always used was no longer trading. Hopefully they were going to come back at some point, but they didn't actually know. And so literally she looked to me to help, and whilst the margin was relatively small, the opportunity in there was much more bigger. So it is about having those really regular conversations with people and creating a culture, Howard, whereby that's the norm, because people want to help the client, and equally they want to help the business succeed. But I think the two have got to go absolutely hand in hand.
I just want to add something here. I think we are a very self-effacing industry. We talk about ourselves as consultants. You read the definition of the word consultant in the Oxford English Dictionary. It's very clear. It says a teacher. It says an expert, an expert providing information, providing knowledge. And that's what we should be. Now, I think we underestimate the amount of knowledge and wisdom and experience and ability that we have very often in our industry. And to your point, and I think this kind of sums it up, something that we think when we give advice, give direction or counsel to a client, something we think has got very limited value because just something we know, piece of information we have, for the client can often be incredibly valuable information that can make a significant difference to their business. And it's very easy, I think, to provide terrific value to your clients by recognizing that you as professionals in our industry are true experts. And you're talking very often, especially in the SME space, To organizations that don't have HRDs, that don't have people working at procurement level, you know, they have limited or no knowledge of employment relations and so forth. And you do, we have that knowledge and experience, and you pass on snippets, you pass on information, wisdom, if you like, experience and knowledge. And those nuggets of gold, that information you give over, which takes us no time and hardly any effort, are welcomed with open arms by the people you work with. And to Paul's point, they remember it. They remember the little bits of information you've given them could make a significant difference to the running of their businesses. And what better time than now? You know, how confusing is the landscape right now for everybody? We know we've been on these programs for 15 weeks now, talking to experts, giving our own knowledge and experience to people. And I've had, and I know you have, Howard, as well, lots of people contact us after these broadcasts talking about how helpful some of the information is that we've passed on, a lot of the information we've passed on. And when we give this information, I don't sit here consciously thinking this is a brilliant piece of information. I'm just passing on knowledge that I have. And I don't know, neither you, Howard or Paul, who that hits, who that information hits, and what resonance it has and what difference that information creates. It's that pebble in the pond, the ripples go out. So please, I mean, just to finalize this particular point before we move on to the next subject, don't hold back from giving good sound advice. Paul's absolutely right. You know, provide counsel, provide support to people in times of need. These are real times of need. And you will find that in big ways and little ways, it comes back to you down the line. Don't expect instant reward when you give support and help. In fact, don't even expect it. But somewhere down the line, it will come back to you. And I've always said it, and I know it sounds a bit airy-fairy, but if you go out there with your arms open to the universe rewards you somewhere down the line. So don't look for what's in it for you. It will come back to you, I promise you, in many, many ways.
So I'm going to bump the next question, which is about technology that we posed, about how we could sort of make marginal gains in technology. And I'm going to come back to that probably in a webinar next week. But what I want to move on to is the bit that I think that really is what we've started to link to now. And that's the recruitment process, the process that adds value. And what we've got to start to think about in the process, and this is what I've started to talk to clients an awful lot about, is how often do you evaluate your process? If we start to think about recruitment and we start to think about recruitment in its true light, we have an awful reputation for appalling attrition, certainly in the first 3, 6, 12 months of recruitment and in recruitment life. Yeah. Now, the question is always going to be, why do we have such appalling attrition? We are recruiters after all. We should be able to recruit good quality staff. Now, is that because some of the processes that we are doing are a little bit draconian, don't actually work, and therefore are driving people out of the business? And a question that I've asked, and there's some people on this call that I've asked this question to, is how often do you actually evaluate all your business processes? And I get this sort of blank look normally when I ask that question, that they don't evaluate them very often. Where if you want to make marginal gains and you start to think about the cyclists and what they did, then they make very little marginal gains and constantly change things to make their bikes go faster. Okay. And it was very interesting when you speak about Chris Boardman, what he did. He wants to make his bike go faster. And at that time, it was before technology really kicked off. He changed one thing about his bike that made it go faster. He took his ball bearings out of his cycle wheels and put ball bearings from a washing machine into his cycle because they would spin ultimately a lot faster than other ball bearings. And it made his bike go faster. So a very small marginal gain, which led to a gold medal for him. So when we start to think about our recruitment processes, we've got to start to think about what things that we can change in our recruitment process, but then we've got to think about why are we changing them? So we always think about the employee journey, and I think about the candidate journey, because if we get the employee journey right, it will give the client journey a far better sort of viewpoint. If we then can give the candidate journey right, then everything that lands on the client's desk is so much superior than any other agency. So if you look after your consultants and ensure their journey is right, and you have to look after your candidates, then what the client sees is product. We are the deliverer of product that is a great product, and therefore how we deliver it becomes really important. Back to Paul's buying a car. The product was great. The service was great until the product landed on the table and the client says, I like that, I'll buy it, and then the service disappeared. So the employee journey and the candidate journey to me becomes really important. So Paul's, let's talk about that journey.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm going to start here by saying that if you employ people who are only driven by making money, that's a very bad place to start. You know, we work in recruitment. I think certainly to make profit. I mean, unashamedly, we should be doing that. That's our purpose, to make money, to provide good income for ourselves, for our people. But you know, for me, and I honestly, and I say this to anybody, I'll look them in the eye and say it. You know, I've worked in the industry for 43 years. My driver, and you may laugh at me, you may think it's unbelievable, but my driver has never been, and still isn't, making money. I mean, making money and a good living and developing profits is for me a byproduct of being passionate about what I do. It's about providing outstanding service to customers, doing everything within my being to give them enormous satisfaction for what I and my people provide. And of course, when you do that and you do it with authenticity and you care a hell of a lot, then it transfers into escalating profits. For me, people that are just purely focused on making money cut corners. They look for the shortest distance between A to Z. And to the point that Paul was making a moment ago, the moment they've made a sale, they're off. They don't care about the client. They don't care about the service, let alone care about after sales. And I've had in my time many high billers work for me. Some of them were brilliant and did care about their people, their candidates, their clients, and some didn't give a stuff. And those are the people that I exited from my business because they were doing me no good at all. For me, if you're passionate about your job, you're passionate about your people, you're passionate about your candidates and delivering world-class service, the money takes care of itself. That's always been my ethos. It's not something I've faked. It's something I feel from my soul. And I think you're looking for people that share those behaviors and values with you. And I know when I talk to my clients all over the country and abroad, they all feel that way. They care a lot. In fact, they care probably too much, as I do. And I think that that's where you begin. Why do we get high attrition rates? Because we are not as careful with our own recruitment as we should be. We need to review the processes that we put in place to recruit people. Let's just perhaps chuck out the window this old view that if people have worked in recruitment before, we should bring them into our business. I used to crack the joke about, and it's still true, about people with recruitment experience that, you know, they're if you lean them up against the mirror and you ask them to breathe and the mirror mists over, they've got a job. Why? Because they've had recruitment experience. I mean, what a lot of BS, really, seriously. I mean, when we're born, do we get a rubber stamp placed on our backsides that says recruitment consultant? No, we don't. Somebody gave us a shot once upon a time when we got into this industry believing that we had the right attributes to make it. None of us are born recruitment consultants. There's nonsense. What we should be looking for are the right behaviors and values. When we bring people into our businesses, people that share our values, our behaviors, excuse me, and you're looking for people with, and I've said it a million times, high emotional intelligence, high EQ. And you add to that great work ethic and you've got yourself the ingredients of a great consultant. I'm sure you agree with me, guys.
I think it's quite interesting, Paul, because I've just checked my backside and I actually have a tattoo that says born recruitment consultant.
I only hope we never have to see it.
But I think what we're talking about there is when we talk about from a management point of view, we're back to that intellectual humility, you know, helping your team unlock their potential. You being the value catalyst, the catalyst that opens up your team's potential. So I always think when we start to look at that employee journey and the candidate journey, I always think, what are they great at? What do they need? And what do they fear? And it's what they fear that I start to really work on. And genuinely, I start to look at training, and I was, all about training. I always think recruitment is very poor. We throw people in for a week, 2 weeks, whatever is training course, then stick them on the tools and say, off you go. And the next course might be in another year's time. We never actually truly help them train. So training should be an ongoing thing, weekly, daily, constantly on the go, to help people improve. Because once you understand what people fear, then you can start to address what they can actually do, and you can remove that fear, because 90% of everything that people fear is false. So if we can remove that, then we can start to free up their ability to give better service. So we find out what they're great at and we develop what they're great at. We find out what they fear and remove what they fear. And then we start to help them achieve what they need to achieve. And that is part of that value sale. We talk about what most business owners do. They spend 80% of their time focusing on their business, where really they should spend 80% of their time focusing on their clients. So if you're helping your consultants with their client journey and their candidate journey, and you're helping them develop clients, and we talk about layer selling, and Paul was alluding to that a little bit earlier on about selling to the next person up. If your sales team are selling to the business line and you're selling to the management line, then all of a sudden you've got two people approach to that business and you're driving that in. Now, a lot of people say, well, that goes against our view of I need to get myself divorced from the sales line because I want to sell my business. But to get to that point, you need to be massively involved in the sales line, and then look at an succession plan to remove yourself out of that and bring sales managers in and sales directors in to do that. But if you look after your people, and this is where there are many marginal gains to be made, then they start to look after your client. Paul, you've done something similar just recently on that, I understand, at Interquest. Talk to me about what you've been doing there.
With the trainees?
Yes.
So I think in mitigation, I think what Paul Jacobs said is absolutely spot on. I think the reality is that the job market has been that tight that we have taken people that we wouldn't perhaps have taken in the past. So I think it was very difficult to recruit very good recruiters up until March. I think now is the most important time for business owners, directors, MDs to look at the talent in the business and work out whether it's the right talent going forward, because you'll probably never get as good an opportunity to change people. And I think I've definitely worked with top billers who are arrogant and rude and not great for the team, but you live with them because they're billing 800 grand a year. And the fear of losing a top biller at that level is quite extreme. But now I think is the time to do it. So I think, if I was running my own business in the here and now today, I think I'd be very much looking at the skills that are in the business and looking to either upskill or swap out based around both attitude and performance, but the attitude probably taking a lot bigger, part of that equation than what it probably did 6 months ago. The bit around the trainees, Howard, we hired 30 people in April last year, and we were left with 10 going into this year. So the dropout rate is about average for the industry. So ending up with around a third, sadly, from trainees. What could we have done differently, and what would I have done differently if I had my time again? I'd have probably set the bar a lot higher, but I wouldn't have ended up with 30 people. I'd have ended up with probably 18 people. And we're under pressure at that moment in time to actually get more heads in the business. So again, it comes back to, where your business is at and what you need. The cost of bringing people in and taking them through the training is astronomical for them not to work out. But I'll just add one point, because you very much talked about the importance of training. I think for me, training is really important, but I think making it come to life and the role the manager has to play in the training is the most important part of it. You can put people on courses, they can spend a day here, spend a day there, they can do some mentoring, do some networking, they can go on an REC training course, but the follow-up is the single one thing that either makes or breaks an individual from a training perspective.
Yeah. I think from there, as we come to the hour, we've touched on 1.5 questions of the 5 questions that we had today, and you can now sort of understand how valuable these marginal gains are and how much we can sort of start to look at marginal gains. I think we go back to that 2 comments about each manager, about that intellectual humility, about being that person that unlocks the full potential of everybody within their business. And I always say, as a manager, if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're perhaps in the wrong room. You need to surround yourself with really smart people to deliver on various things, which means that your intellectual honesty needs to be absolutely high on the integrity scale. And if you can dive that, then you can start to drive that culture. And once you start to drive that culture, then you're in a whole different plane. And as Paul said there, bringing 30 people in to have 10 left, is indicative of the recruitment marketplace. But what a sad sort of stat that is when you start to look at that stat. And we've got to think about how we can do that, because what actually happens because of that, it's not just the cost of bringing those people in and the cost of training them and the cost of that going out of the business. It's also the knock-on effect of how your company is then perceived within the marketplace with a low quality product driving into your client and your candidate marketplace. And that to me is the big difference that we need to be making as we come out of lockdown. How we are perceived by the marketplace is absolutely important. So next week, what we're going to touch on, we're going to carry on talking about this very process, the recruitment process, and we'll start to bring in then the software and technology side of the process, and we'll bring in the staff training and staff development of the process, because I think once we start to hit those, then we're starting to really hit the areas that we can make true marginal gains. And I think everyone sort of should be left with that sort of feeling thought that as we sit here, as we're all sat in the boat, and the boat is very simple, your job, once you're in the boat, is to make the boat go faster. The common is that you're in the boat. How do you stay in the boat? And if you start to think about the British rowing team there was, the famous story about the rowing 8. There was 8 people in the boat, but there was 12 people on the team. So that means 4 people were never in the boat, but they were always fighting in the boat. So once you got in the boat, your job was to stay in the boat. And to do that, you have to add commentary, you have to add insight, you have to add ideas, you have to be collaborative, and you have to ensure that everyone is pulling in the same direction. And that to me is all about culture. All about culture and getting the things right. So guys, I'd like to thank you all for your time. Paul Sharp, I would very much like to invite you back onto next week's call. I know we press ganged you late last night.
You just did the same again.
You weren't given a choice this time.
So I'm going to make it even worse. I'm sticking at the end of the plank now and saying, please come back next week so we can finish this conversation off from there, because I think there's a lot of things that we can have. Those that are attending, if you have any questions and you want to answer any questions now, feel free to send those questions. I still have all your questions from this week. That I hope we've answered quite a few of those questions, but I think there's more that we want to go into next week, because I think this is such a massive topic now, and it's certainly where we're going to, and going from a recruitment point of view, and it's our opportunity to really change the market forever. So if there's no questions now, thank you very much for your time. I look forward to seeing you next week. Paul Sharp, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure having you on here. Paul Jacobs, once again, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great day, and we'll see you next week.
See you guys. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.